I'm Savannah,
And I'm Sterling.
and this is In Memoriam.
And this week we have Tommy.
Hey guys,
Wright.
What's up?
not much. How are y'all?
Good,
Pretty good.
doing good. Tommy's joined us today. He's going to talk to us about his brother Joe. I'm going to tell you, I've known Tommy now for about 15 years, and it is one of the biggest joys of my friendship with him to hear him tell stories about Joe. Very excited to have him here this week.
Well, I guess I'll start by saying my brother Joe was, he passed away November the 5th, November the 15th, 2001, at 48 years old. He was my only brother. I have a older sister. Joe was 8 years my elder and my sister 10. He was a great guy. Joe was he was sick he lived with HIV and AIDS for 25 years, and we were very fortunate to have him that long.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great guy, lived a great life in spite of some of the challenges that he had throughout life as a result of his sickness and some mental illness issues. He not only was a brother to me, he was kind of a father figure to me. My dad was pretty absent growing up, so he kind of assumed both roles there. He and my sister were wonderful to me when I was little. They were my protectors. They were my teachers. They taught me how to read and write at a real early age, and they fussed over me a lot. And I'm very fortunate to have them. Have great memories of my brother. He was a super smart guy. He had a real good gift for foreign language. He spoke 5 languages. He traveled a lot. He worked hard. He worked for the phone company for years. He worked in several different capacities at the phone company. He changed around from job to job within the phone company. He was the union steward at his shop for the telephone workers union for a while. He was just an all-around good guy. He was well loved by everybody that knew him. I've never heard anybody say a bad word about him. He was an entrepreneur later in life. He and his partner and another friend of theirs, they owned a bar, and he ran the bar for quite a few years until his health got to the point that he just couldn't do it anymore. It was a real bad thing right there towards the end. He called a family meeting with my sister and myself, and he informed us that he wasn't going to be taking his medication anymore, and he passed away 7 days later. My daughter Emma was born 10 days before my brother passed. So I had all this joy in my life with my youngest daughter being born, and then 10 days later, some of the worst heartbreak of my life, losing my brother. So it was that 10-day period, and especially the 7 from the day that he came home from the hospital. That was a tough time. He was laying in the hospital at Presbyterian in Dallas, wasn't doing well. Decided he was not going to take his medicine anymore. Called my sister and I in for a meeting and informed us of that decision, and we knew immediately what the end result was going to be, and that it wasn't going to be long. And it was 7 days, almost to the hour, from the time we had that meeting to the time he passed. We came home one evening, and then it was later in the evening, 7 days later, he passed. He passed away with my mother, my sister, and I all standing by his side, holding his hand, and I think that if ever given the opportunity to sit with a loved one in their last moments, you should probably not avoid that. It's kind of a good thing, and it creates a pretty good sense of what's going on. It gives you an opportunity to say anything you need to say to them, or hear anything that they need to say to you. Unfortunately, in my brother's case, he was in a kind of a comatose state the last 2 days. He was unresponsive, still breathing and heart beating, but he was he wasn't able to speak, or he just laid there with his eyes closed for a couple of days. When he was at the hospital, I asked him if he wanted to come home, and he said he did. So we had a hospice deliver an extra long hospital bed to my mother's house, and we laid him up in her den, and we kind of just took care of him and spent time with him that last week. But it was 7 days to the day, I mean almost to the hour, that he passed after he stopped taking his medicine. Like I said earlier, we were very fortunate. We knew so many people he was caught up in the kind of the first wave of people that had AIDS, and it was before anybody really knew what AIDS was and what it was doing, and they really didn't know much about it at first, or if they did, they weren't letting on that they did. But we've had so many friends that were friends of his that we hung out with. My ex, Emma's mother, and I used to go to the bar and visit my brother a lot when he was up there working, and I used to put in some hours for him up there when they were traveling. I would go up and help out. But we lost a ton of friends, that people that we became friends with in that bar, and it would be like, some of them only months from the time they found out that they were sick until they were gone. And so he was able to respond to medicine for a long time, and I'm really, really regretful that he couldn't have hung on a little longer, because the medicine got way better after he passed away. There's a lot of people now that are on PrEP or whatever that do really, really well, and some of them's viral load is undetectable now because of the medicine that they're on. And so if he could have hung on a little bit longer, he might still be with us here today. But that's kind of neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is that I lost somebody that I loved dearly, and I grieved really, really hard for a long time, probably 16, 17 years. I'm kind of prone to that seasonal depression, and every year I got in a funk. When fall would roll around, I would get in a real dark blue period and stay there until the springtime came. Mm-hmm. And I finally worked through most of the grief that I feel like I'm going to have to work through in regards to him. And since then, my mother, she's been gone about 10 years now, and lost my dad a few years ago. So it's just my sister and I now, and that's a really odd feeling, for it just to be the two of us when when it was all of us at one time. But if it's just one of those things that we have to deal with, and as heavy and as hard as that grief was to carry for all those years, time's taken care of it. It's made it lighter. It's made it easier to carry. It's never going to really be okay, but at the same time, it kind of is okay. You just get to where it's not in the forefront of your mind. I think I've related to the story to y'all before that it's like we had him for a long time, knowing what the end result was going to be. We knew what the inevitable was going to be, but it still didn't make it any easier when the day came. That was a really tough time. But we were fortunate that we were there with him. We were also, my sister and I were also fortunate enough to be with my mom when she passed away. Yeah. And I don't want to have to be in that position anymore, but if I am in that position, it's better to be there than somewhere else, wondering, could I have said something? Should I have said something? Was there something that I needed to say that I never did? It's good to have that opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Well, and Tommy, also, I think it's good for your loved one too. Like, even though Joe wasn't talking the last few days of his life, I still believe that they feel you.
Sure.
They know you're there.
Yeah.
And my mom had Alzheimer's, and I knew that she could, even after she got to that point where she wasn't talking really or anything, I knew that she knew what I was saying. I could just tell by her facial expressions and, her movements and her breathing and things like that. I know that she knew that I was there. And, my sister and I took care of her for 7 years at home. We made her a promise that we wouldn't put her in a nursing home unless it was absolutely necessary. And we didn't. We kept her. My sister moved in with her, and I went up a night or two a week or whatever the situation called for, and I'd sit with her while my sister worked, and our schedules worked out well. I worked days, my sister worked nights, so she was with her during the day and I was with her at night, and we hired a few nurses here and there, but I'm convinced that my brother could hear what we were saying to him, and I know that he was, just because he couldn't speak back or anything, I'm convinced that he could hear us. You know, he wasn't awake and aware and lucid or whatever by any means, but I don't think that he was just completely checked out.
No, I think they still feel your presence.
Yeah, and that's a situation I have kind of ran from on 2 different occasions. In one of them, I do regret and hold a lot of guilt for not seeing them. I mean, it's a rough decision to make in the moment. Definitely not someone like your brother or your mom, but when you haven't seen someone in that state of close to death, to make that decision, to make that a lasting memory or not, it's a real rough one. So I don't know that I would ever choose to not see someone in their last moments again, but I have, and I gotta, keep going with it.
And I spent a lot of time with Horace right there at the end.
Yeah.
I would let Doris and Bill go home at night, and I would stay out there all night and sleep on the couch with him because I didn't want him to be alone when he passed.
Yeah.
And we knew he was about to, and so I just felt like it was the right thing to do, to be with him, and I was able to do it. And and we all know how much everybody loved Horace, and I had a special connection with him that's been almost lifelong. But I can remember times in my life when I would avoid those things as well. Grief's not something that you want to openly embrace right off the bat. It's a tough deal, and you don't invite it in. You just have to deal with it when it happens. And there were a lot of times in my life I had relatives or whatever that were sick, and I didn't want to go to the hospital and see them laid up in the bed sick.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to do it because I didn't want to deal with it. But eventually, we all have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Sometime. And
well, I feel like part of it is you're just like, maybe if I don't go, maybe they'll make it out of the hospital and maybe I won't ever I don't know. Part of it's accepting that that's happening in the moment, and you just don't want to.
Well, and it's also just things you can't unsee.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was there when my mama passed, and that was pretty wild. Like, black stuff came out of her mouth, and she looked like an alien from the cancer treatment, and it just kind of looked like something out of a horror movie. And I had horrible nightmares for a while after that, where I would just wake up screaming because I couldn't. It's just things you can't unsee. But in hindsight, I'm thankful I was there when it happened.
Yeah.
It's just.
Yeah, I think that's really what it. Both people I consciously chose not to see and had the opportunity to. I had not previously seen them in a weakened state at all, or like in a sickened state. So I think that was most of it. But yeah, I definitely heavily regret one of them, very much so. The other one does not bother me as much, but.
Well, I just think that people are scared of it.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said, like, you can't unsee. I think being scared of seeing something you can't unsee is a lot of it. So.
Well, and so far it's kind of all been doom and gloom about my brother, but he was a really good guy. He was a Eagle Scout. He was super smart. He did well in school always. Got a foreign language degree from the University of Texas at Arlington. Worked for the phone company forever. I shared this story with y'all not too long ago. He worked for the YMCA in the summers, and he was kind of an instructor for everything. He taught swimming, gave swimming lessons, life saving. But one of the funniest things was he he taught BB gun firing, how to fire a BB gun. So I was staying at a babysitter, and my mother came to get me, and all the BB guns from the YMCA were in the back seat of her Plymouth. And I jumped in the back seat, and I picked up a gun and pulled the trigger and shot the back window out of my mother's Plymouth. And you know, my brother was like, he was kind of worried because he's the one that had left the cocked loaded BB gun in the back seat, and I was just a kid that didn't have any better sense than to pick it up and pull the trigger. But he was a very good uncle to all my kids. And my sister has 2 kids as well. He and his partner George were always thoughtful gift givers. They would give real practical gifts, like they would give my kids savings bonds and stuff like that. And later in life, they came in handy for my kids. You know, when they needed a few bucks, they could go cash in one of their lifelong savings bonds that they'd been sitting on, and they had a little money in their pocket. But he was good with a dollar. He was a wonderful uncle and a good brother, and you know, he was a wonderful son. My mother was, when he passed away, my mother was never the same after that. It affected her in a way that I didn't think. My mother was she was cut from a special cloth. She survived the Depression. She lived through hard times. She was one of the most hard-working people I've ever met. She was also good with a dollar. She was frugal. She wasn't cheap, but she was frugal, and she provided for us in a good way. I mean, we never did without anything that we needed. We might not have always got everything we wanted. We might not have got the tennis shoes we wanted or whatever it was, but we never did without things that we needed. And the life lessons that she taught us were all lessons that stick with us today. And my brother was a little better learner than I was on a lot of those things. I kind of was a slow learner.
Well, I feel like, just from the stories you've shared, I feel like Joe had a very sharp mind.
He did that.
Even at a very young age. Do you want to tell us about Me Too?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, my mother lived on a cotton farm in Five Points, Texas, and they had neighbors down the road. Their name were Billy Joe and Me Too. And Billy Joe he brought Me Too home as a war bride. They were married in France. They came back to 5 Points, and my brother was enamored or infatuated or whatever with Me Too, this little short, pretty French lady with this wonderful accent, and he was hooked.
When he was how old?
Probably 8, maybe 9 years old, somewhere around there, maybe 7, somewhere around there. It was before I was even here, so he would have had to have been 8 or younger. But my mother would go down in the afternoons, and she would help Me Too cook the foods that Billy Joe was used to eating. He was used to the food that we're used to, you know, beans and cornbread and biscuits and, you know, what most people call comfort food. That's just what we were raised on. And so she went down and basically tried to teach Me Too how to cook the things that Billy Joe liked to eat, because Me Too was from France and she didn't know anything about biscuits and gravy. So my mother tried to teach her that, and she probably cooked a lot of meals for the Oglesbys down the street while she was teaching Me Too. But they became fast friends, and they were friends forever. And it was always nice to get in a social setting with them, because my brother and Me Too would be over in the corner speaking French to each other, so they could both practice their French while, you know, everybody else was doing their thing in English. But it was always nice to see him be able to practice what he loved, and that was speaking foreign languages. And he was very good at it, and he was fluent in French and Spanish, and he spoke Portuguese, English, of course, and then he was starting to learn some German. And he just had a love for it. He had a gift for it. He had a knack for it. He understood the way language worked, and he took advantage of that. And he ended up not being able to use it much in his career. I think he used his Spanish a little bit when he worked for the phone company. He was a 411 operator for a while.
Yeah.
He was an installer for a while. He installed people's phones and phone lines. He did several jobs with the phone company, but he did get to use his Spanish when he was a 411 operator. And but he was he finally got to travel to France. He and my mother and my sister and my niece all went over there, and they went to Ireland, England, Ireland, France. They went to Austria. They went to the Czech Republic. They had a pretty nice little trip.
That
And
sounds like a good tour.
George was able, my brother's partner George was able to find where his ancestors were buried. Real interesting story about them. They were the people who hunted on private lands for the Habsburgs. They were the people that hunted their game and fed them their food. And you know, poaching was almost a hanging offense back in those days. If you were caught poaching on royal land, that was a pretty big no-no. And they were the people who officially hunted that land for the Habsburgs.
How neat.
And he was able to find where they were laid to rest in the Czech Republic. And my mom got real big on genealogy, and my sister kind of followed up where my mom left off when she got dementia. She kind of had to put it down, and my sister kind of picked up the mantle, and they've done a great job of tracing our roots back a long way on both sides of my family. And there's some pretty interesting characters back in my past. I have a sure enough outlaw who was
Not surprising.
yeah. He was a sure enough outlaw. He shot his way out of a courtroom in Walker County he had been charged with actually murdering someone, and either guns were hidden in the courtroom or they were snuck to the people as they entered the courtroom. But they had a shootout in a space not much bigger than we're in right now, and he escaped that. The crowd outside the courtroom parted, let him run through, and two other guys run through, jump on horses, and then they closed ranks so the police couldn't follow them. So they got a little head start. And when my sister was doing the genealogy, she discovered that he had kind of fallen off the face of the earth. It was a long time before there was any idea about what happened to him, and they think that he went to Arkansas and lived under an assumed name for the rest of his life, because shortly after he left, his wife and his son, they left and went to Arkansas. So they believe that he went there and sent for them, and then they came behind him. But it's kind of an interesting story, and it's one of the only times that martial law has been imposed in Texas. It was imposed in Walker County right after that, and it's referred to in historical circles as the Walker County Rebellion. And it's a pretty interesting story. But anyway, back to what we were talking about with my brother. I think one of the finest things he did while he was kind of on the downhill slide when he was getting sick was he had a bucket list of things he wanted to do, and you know, it was real simple things. There were things he wanted to see. They went to Palo Duro Canyon. They went down to the coast. He told me, he said, I want to stick my feet in some hot sand one more time. So he went down to the coast, and George's family, they were from Victoria. He comes from a fine family. They're farmers, and they were close to the coast a lot. And George had lived in Corpus Christi as a young man and worked offshore on oil rigs. And so they went to the coast, and they went and found for my brother, it was thigh-high cotton, you know, and he picked some of that cotton, and I'm sure George still probably has a couple of pieces of that cotton. And, you know, I went up, George asked me if there were any of my brother's things that I wanted, and I went up there and I got some things that probably wouldn't make sense to most people. They wouldn't have any monetary value whatsoever to anybody, but my brother was a heavy smoker. He smoked at least a pack and a half of Winston 100s a day. And I've never seen anybody enjoy a cigarette more than my brother did. And I found, you remember when they used to do Marlboro Miles?
Yes.
My brother had one of those caps from Marlboro Miles. And it still had his smell on it. And when I picked it up, I smelled it, and I smelled him. And I put that in a plastic bag and sealed it up. And I kept that. I've still got it. His smell's long worn off, but I trapped it in that plastic bag, and every once in a while I'd go get me a little sniff of it, you know.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a neat thing. And but I just got a few little things. I have a pencil drawing on my wall at the house that is one of my favorite pieces of art that I have, and it's a beautiful piece of art. It's kind of a sad. It kind of gives you a sad feeling when you look at it, but it's one of my favorite things. And he framed it. It's still in the same frame that it was in when he owned it, and I have it hanging in my living room. I look at it every day, and it's one of my favorite things that I have of his.
I didn't know that was Joe's.
That in that gold frame over by
Yeah.
the kitchen door. Yeah, that was his. And that I didn't want very many things. You know, he had pretty much given me all he needed to give me in my life. He gave me plenty of love. He gave me confidence when I needed it. He taught me how to jump off of a high diving board when I needed that confidence to take that step off of that. And he picked me up when I was down. I had some issues in my earlier life and wasn't doing so well all the time. But if I ever needed a place to stay or if a car to drive, I was out of work one time and looking for a job, and he knew I'd have a better opportunity of finding a job in Dallas than I would here. So he's like, "You come stay at my house as long as you need to. You can drive my car to go do interviews." He said, "Drop me off at work and pick me up every day and make your interviews around it." I mean, he did all the things for me that I ever needed done, and taught me how to fish, tons of things. And I didn't need anything else of his. He had given me pretty much everything that I felt like I really needed, and it were the real things in life. It wasn't objects. It was important lessons and things like that he taught. And and I've told you all this before. It's a weird dynamic when you lose somebody that's a strong figure in your family's life. My family kind of scattered to the winds after that. After he passed, we just didn't have the togetherness that we had before that. And I've always said that he was the glue that kind of kept my family together.
Yeah. Some people just are.
Yeah, we all gravitated to him.
Yeah.
And when he was not there anymore, we just kind of floated away and didn't gravitate towards each other like we had in the past. And then my sister and I, of course, we had to come together and get closer probably than we ever were when my mother got sick. So, these bad things that happen to our loved ones, illness and death and those things, they can work two ways. They can either split people apart or they can bring people back together. And I've seen a lot of families that have gone through these things that it can do a number in a bad way on a family, and they split up and don't have anything to do with each other anymore. But so much of my family was much older than me. My grandmother had a bunch of sisters, and we grew up around them. We had a huge family when I was a small kid. We'd have 40 or 50 people at Thanksgiving, and we had cousins, and my mother used to do cousins parties once a year with one batch of her cousins, and families don't seem to do that much anymore.
No, that's a shame.
Like they used to. And we all lived in the same house. My mom, my brother, my sister, my aunt, my grandmother. We lived in the same house when I was a kid. And my grandfather passed when I was about a year old, and so my grandmother just moved in with my mom and the rest of our family, and she was a big present figure in my life until she passed. But all of her sisters, they're all gone. Her brother, there was 6 girls and a boy in that family, and they're all gone now. And so most of my relatives going back the other way, there's just not any of them left. And I'm fortunate enough that I have a big family. I've got 5 kids, and I've got a bunch of grandkids, and so I have that to look forward to now. And I look back the other way, and I look at the ones coming behind me instead of the ones that went before me now. And I'm the old guy at the club, which is okay.
It is okay.
Yeah, it is okay. I like it.
Tommy, one of the things that we talk about sometimes when we talk about Joe is kind of how he lingered after he passed.
Yeah.
Talk to me. Okay, so we've talked about how sometimes the way that we identify with our loved ones that we didn't really know, like Emma, who was born right around that time, is through pictures and stories that we share with our loved ones. Tell us about Emma and Melissa's experiences after the fact.
When Emma was little, she was maybe just a couple, three, just starting to talk, whatever age that was. We shared tons of pictures. We always showed her, this is your Uncle Joe. You know, he's gone to be with God, he's gone to heaven, or however we explained it to her. But she knew his face, she knew who he was. We talked about him often. We didn't want her to, I guess what we wanted her to grow up knowing him even though he wasn't here anymore. And I can tell you right now that he would have literally eaten her alive. He loved all of his nieces, but I would take pictures. You know, she was born and we took a bunch of pictures. I took them straight to the Walgreens and had them developed, and I took them up there and showed them to my brother the very next day, and he oohed and awed over those pictures. And you know, he thought she was it. He thought she was the best. And he was real sorry that he didn't get to meet her and wasn't going to get to know her, and he kind of knew what the deal was going to be, but she definitely knew who he was. So we were sitting in my house one night, and my brother was tall. He was 6'7" or 8", depending on who you ask. And she was sitting on the floor watching TV, and she looked up into the doorway going into my hall, and she looked right up about almost to the top of the door facing, and she said, "Look, Mom, it's Joe." And our blood just kind of ran cold, you know, because I looked and I didn't see him, and Melissa didn't. And you know, I'm somewhat skeptical. You know, I guess it's maybe skepticism about something I really don't know anything about.
Right.
But you know, she was convinced she saw him, and I used to smell his. I'm a smell person. There's something about that. My sense of smell in my brain. There's something really strong between those two things, and I think our sense of smell oftentimes is way stronger than we give it credit for being. You know, it's every bit as strong as our sight or taste or touch. And I would catch a whiff of my brother every once in a while. You know, it was cigarettes and patchouli. And I would smell it from time to time, and it was a wonderful smell to me. It was just like the best. And I would always share that with Melissa or whatever. And then, you know, Emma was convinced that she saw him. And, you know, there was a time where someone thought they saw him in my bathroom. And I mean, there's just been a few times, but I haven't had any of those things happen in years. So, you know, I don't know if somebody can still come around and make themselves known to you. Maybe they do right after they go, just to let you know that things are going to be okay. And maybe once you get okay about it, they stop coming. I don't know. But if that's the case, I suspect that's what happened here, because it happened for a time and then it hasn't happened since.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think it's interesting when children see things like that. Does that happen? I don't know. But when children see things like that, you know, that's before they're old enough that somebody's told them it's not possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
and he might have been checking on him.
He sure might. And who knows? I mean, when we get older and we're taught that we're not supposed to believe in those things, or that those things are spooky, or that they're weird, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
I mean, to have the innocence and the imagination of a child is a wonderful thing. And if people can figure out a way to pull it off and still remain adults, I think it's probably something we should all look into.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, it's a great thing. You know, and it's weird when you watch your kids grow up and certain things happen in their lives and you see a little bit of that innocence get chipped away. That means that those things like that being possible, those are kind of getting chipped away as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a handful of stories about me and my, like, infant stages and ghost stories with my dad's brother. So, yeah,
Your namesake?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's there's plenty. So, it's definitely possible, especially, you know, around with it being around the time of the introduction to a new family member, you know? Who knows?
just made me think about when we were in the car the other night at the store, and I was talking about going home and watching Bigfoot videos.
Yeah.
You go home and watch 50 Bigfoot videos, and you never get to see Bigfoot.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
So, you know, who knows what's
That don't mean
what's
it's not out
possible
there.
in that regard, you know. And you know, we've all had experiences where we've seen things that we can't explain,
Yeah.
and maybe some things aren't meant to be explained.
That's
Right.
Maybe they're
that's
just
my
meant,
theory.
Maybe they're just meant to be experienced, and you live with the experience and you go on. You
I
know?
I think that life is full of things that we are not supposed to explain. We
And
are
I don't-
not supposed to know.
I don't really require an explanation for everything.
I don't either.
Just let them be and let it be.
Well, since we're talking about this time period of Joe's life, you want to tell us about the corn dog?
Oh yeah. He was already sick. It was right before he went into the hospital for the last time. And it was about state fair time. And Melissa and I went to the state fair, and Joe was already suffering from. He was having some tumors in his mouth and some lesions and things like that, and that's just par for the course when you have AIDS. But he couldn't eat, and he was having to eat soft food, and he was having to be real careful about what he did, and so we went to the state fair, and of course my routine at the state fair is I go and I get a corn dog as soon as I get there, and then I go around and I eat all my other little things that I like to eat. I kind of have a routine. I tend to go to the same places and get the same thing every year when I go.
They set you up for that. They put the corn
Yeah.
dogs right in front of the
Yeah.
front gate.
Yep. So, and I always pay forward at least one corn dog for whoever's in line behind me. I do. That's a habit I've gotten into at the fair. I do that every year. And then on the way out, I get a corn dog and eat it on the way to the car. So we got myself a corn dog, and I got two for my brother, and I had them wrapped in foil, and he only lived about less than 10 minutes from Fair Park. I mean, from getting out of the park to his
Yeah.
house, it probably wasn't 10 or 15 minutes. So they were still warm, and pulled up in front of his house, and the curtains were open in the front window, and I could see he and George inside, and I knocked on the door, and he came to the door, and I went in and took him the corn dogs, and Melissa stayed in the car, and I just dropped him off, and he smiled so big, and he said, "You know, I haven't been able to eat, right?" And I said, "I know." He said, "I'm fixing to eat these corn dogs." And he did. And when the last memory I have of him not being in a hospital bed was looking through the window of his house as I drove away, and he was sitting there eating that corn dog in his chair. And that's a real fine memory for me to carry
Yeah.
around. You know, it was good. And you know, I would have several times he and George would go to the fair with us, and they couldn't go this year because he couldn't make it. So I figured I would at least
You made sure he
I
got
made
his
sure
corn dog.
he
Got
got
his
his
corn
his
dog.
Fletcher's corn dog. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's a real good memory that I have of him. And you know, sometimes I think Melissa still beats herself up for not getting out of the car that night, and I hate that because she certainly didn't mean anything by it,
Yeah.
you know. And she was big pregnant at the time too, and she'd been walking around the fair, and she was ready to get to the house. That was
Yeah, I
right
bet.
right before Emma got there. So, you know, she's just like, I'm just going to wait in the car. So, but you know, I got a great memory out of the deal, and she has the memory of being in on the corn dog delivery too.
Yeah.
So it all worked out okay.
That's right.
But he was crazy about her, and she was him. They hit it off the first time they met, and I can honestly say that she loved him just as hard as I did. She was crazy about him, and he was her. He told me, I remember after they met a couple of times, I was up at my mom's house, and can we cuss on here?
Yeah.
I guess we can.
Fuck it.
Yeah. He came in and he told me, he said, "Tommy, don't you fuck this up."
Yeah.
Talking about me and her, you know, and he said, "This is a good one, don't fuck it up." And I said,
Yeah.
"Okay, I won't." And you know, and we were together a long time, and things happened, and
Well, and y'all still have a good relationship.
we do.
You
We
talk
absolute-
to Melissa all the time.
we absolutely do.
And y'all still talk about Joe often.
Absolutely. Most every time we get on the phone and talk, we thought about, you know, something will pop up, and she'd be like, yeah, we were talking about Joe the other day, or we thought about Joe. She truly did love him, and he did her, and I'm real grateful that they got along that well. And you know, he was crazy about her. He thought she was the prettiest thing he'd ever seen, and he knew that she was good to me, and and he knew that she was going to be a good mother and all those things. And you know, they really did truly love each other, and she grieved every bit as hard as I did, and she still does to this day. Every time we talk about him, she said, you know, I don't think I'll ever get over this. And I said, no, neither do I. And I don't think we're supposed to get over it, because if you get over it, you're going to forget them.
I don't think there is any getting over it if you
No.
truly.
You know, and I've talked to y'all about how marking that date that he passed away, it took me 15, 16 years, 17 years to get to the point where that I didn't feel some kind of impending doom when that day was on the horizon. And, you know, and the last couple of years I managed to get through that day without really even thinking about it until after the fact. And I feel like that's definitely some progress in my grieving, in my grieving process. That's progress that I made that I really desperately needed to do, because, you know, I stayed in a funk for a real long time over this, and I grieved this harder than I have any other situation I've ever been in my life. It was a tough blow to me, and you know, like I said earlier, we all knew it was coming.
Yeah.
You know, but we all know that it's coming for all of us anyway. It's inevitable
No
for
one
all of us.
escapes it.
But it doesn't make it any easier.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it might make it harder.
No, but Tommy, I'm going to tell you, sharing that over, you know, all this time, you've gotten to a point where you don't feel that impending doom.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for you sharing that, because that's comforting.
It is. I mean, that is a conversation me and my wife Chris have had this week. Her best friend died a year ago, coming up Friday, and she just doesn't know. I mean, it's just this, like you said, impending doom. It's like as soon as we realized it was coming up a couple weeks ago, it's been like a
It's like all you can think about.
all she can think about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like a countdown in our heads, just to see like what emotions blow up on Friday and what happens and how we react and what do we do? Like, do we try and make it special, or do we, you know, it's a...
Can I tell you what I do?
Yeah.
So I get real weird around my mom's birthday, my mom's
Mm-hmm.
death date.
Yeah.
And I like to do things, on those days, I try to do things that she liked, which means I go to town and get a Coke. I have some tacos, you know, like...
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I
We'll
try
go
to...
hit up City View.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And sometimes that feels good.
Yeah. That is a good solution. I mean, that's... Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do it because otherwise I'm just going to be sad in the bed.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a, you know, it's a good thing to talk about, and especially such a heavy grief that's been so long that you have actual, you know, experience that not many people have. Just having to deal with that for so long, and you know, still being...
Well, you know, I've told y'all this before, and I'm gonna continue to say it. I think this is a great thing that y'all are doing this podcast. I know that just telling your story, whatever your story is, just being able to tell it to another human being out loud is a big part of what makes us heal. I think that, you know, I posted, or I don't remember if I posted it on y'all's Instagram page in relation to your podcast, or if I messaged it to you, but I said, you know, being good friends, this is just proof that being good friends isn't always fun and games. Yeah. And it's not. And we have to, you know, we've got to be here for each other during tough times, and we seem to, because of what we do in our fraternal lives, we have a different point of view when it comes to that. We know how important that those things are, and we know that we're all born to die.
Yeah.
And, you know, we kind of, I know that that's helped me deal with things just the fact that we deal with it in our fraternal lives all the time. It's something that's at the forefront of what we do. And, you know, I just know that as long as friends like us can sit around and talk about friends or loved ones that we've lost, and we have a lot of fun. We don't just sit around and talk about this kind of stuff, because we do know how to have fun, and we do.
Yeah, we do.
You know, we all enjoy each other's company, and we're all good friends, and we're good together, and I, you know, I think it's just great that y'all are doing this, and I'm really flattered and honored that y'all would invite me to be a part of it, and thankful that y'all would allow me to tell my story. And it's just one more step in the healing process that we go through. And the more times I can tell these stories, and the more times I can share who he was to us and to the world, then the better off I'm going to be, and the quicker I'm going to be able to lighten up this burden that we call grief.
Yeah.
Well, Tommy, we appreciate you sharing those stories with us.
Well, I'm happy to do it. And, you know, I talked to y'all about some of the episodes y'all have upcoming, and I think y'all got a good thing going here, and we're going to be able to honor some really special people that we love, and that we've been good friends with, and good brothers and sisters to in our fraternity. And we're going to get to have some good things come from this. And, you know, doing that fraternal funeral, I've had to do that 4 times. And it was just boom, 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 boom. We had 4 deaths right close together, all of them members of our organization. And, you know, having to do that first one, I didn't think I was going to make it through when we did it for Horace. But we have tools. We have tools that we can use to honor our loved ones in what we do in our regular lives, and what we can do in our fraternal lives. And I'm real grateful that we've got that. That funeral charge that we do in Odd Fellowship is one of the most beautiful things, and one of the greatest ways to honor anybody that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so hopefully we don't have to do it much, you know.
Luckily, I've never seen it.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
it's moving.
Hopefully, it'll be a
very
while
moving.
before I have to.
It's hard to get some of the words out of your mouth, you know.
I'm sure.
But it's moving, and it's important, and the words matter. And I'm thankful we can do those things too.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, and you know, once again, I'm thankful to y'all for doing this, and I love y'all, and I'm glad that we're all able to sit here and do this together.
Yeah.
We love you, Tommy.
Thank you for coming on.
You're very welcome.
I guess with that,
Joe Wright.
Joseph Edward Wright.
May his memory be a blessing.
And it is for me.